Welcome back to Through the Valley. This is your host, Bahar Alexander, executive coach, author, and speaker. Today, I have a dear friend of mine, Heather Davidson, with me in the studio. And Heather and I have been friends for a number of years. She is truly an extraordinary human being, and I'm so delighted to have her here. Throughout her life, Heather has worn many hats: big sister, junior high school president, rock and roll singer, pharmaceutical leader, and now an expat living in Madrid. Over 20 years at Eli Lilly and Arcadia Pharmaceuticals, she's honed her coaching and strategic thinking skills. Though her most defining moment may have come in 2018, when someone asked her what she would do if nothing was holding her back. And she answered, move abroad. It took 6 years, a few twists and turns, and a lot of courage. But she made it happen in 2024. She lives by the belief that being present and grateful aren't just nice ideas, they're a practice. She doesn't have a famous quote on her wall, just a simple reminder she comes back to every day. Tomorrow isn't promised. For Heather, this is not platitude. It's a reason she is in Spain. Heather, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Today, we're going to be talking about decision-making in leadership. I've had a couple of episodes on decision-making because it really is by far the most defining spaces for leadership. Most people think decision-making is just about those really big moments, like the one you had, deciding to move abroad. But actually, decision-making shows up in the moment-to-moment choices we make. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, both as a leader and someone who has a background in psychology. So this conversation is going to be quite interesting for our listeners. You know, we think decision-making just simply changes the external elements of our life. But the truth is that every time we make a decision, there is an identity shift as well. We change internally as well. And we change in three ways. We're impacted in three ways. Our choices and decisions either confirm who we are, undermine who we are, or they transform who we are. And I'm wondering, Heather, before this big move to Madrid, who were you?
Wow, that's a big question. I was a student of life, focused on learning from every opportunity that presented itself, personally and professionally. And you mentioned, these internal changes, these internal shifts can define us or redefine us. And I think that's what life is about. It's this continuation of redefining who we are, what we aspire to do and to be. And for me, being someone who constantly wants to learn and evolve and take calculated risks, I've come to realize is one of my values, which is one reason I'm here in Spain. Um, I can think of a couple of examples. I'm sure there are many, but there are a couple that come to mind of when I made internal shifts, internal mindset changes. One was in my 20s when I was younger, that had to do more with how I presented emotionally. And the other was professionally, because I would describe myself as a recovering workaholic. And so, that caused a lot of reflection once I had a conscious awareness that this was happening, and changes in mindset, changes in behavior, and changes in outcomes.
Interesting. That resonates with me very much. And I'm wondering, how has your identity shifted since the decision to move abroad?
That, for me, has probably shifted most dramatically. Here I am 52 years old, and I had to redefine my identity. I made a lot of changes actually before coming here. I was married for many years, and now I'm not. I left my corporate job. I came to a country where I don't speak the language, and where I do know some people, but it's like starting over. It's like hitting the reset button. And so that question of how has my identity changed is a big one because I had to basically recreate myself, because so many things had changed in my life. Of course, at the core, I believe I'm the same person. I have the same values. And so I think that's probably a big piece of it. As long as you're driven by those values and your decisions are made based on those values, then I can feel like I'm making a good decision. I have good judgment. However, coming here, making all those changes, that prompted a lot of thought and reflection, and bringing in intuition, bringing in the idea of being cautious, because you have to really think through, am I making the right decision? But at the core of it, I've learned that I also have to trust my intuition, and that's kind of the calming voice that says this is the right direction you're headed. And at the same time, of course, fear enters.
Of
Um,
course.
Caution enters the picture. So my identity has changed because, yeah, I'm redefining myself as a professional, um, personally, new friends, new language, all of that.
It's so brave, Heather. I remember the first time we spoke, I was so in awe of you. As someone who has gone through some of the big transitions that you have gone through, but didn't make the last move of going abroad, just leaving everything behind. I was so in awe of your courage. I love how you spoke about intuition. How do you feel your intuition has impacted your courage bone?
Mm, Following my intuition has also been a journey on thinking about when I was younger personally and professionally. So let's talk about the professional side because I remember this shift. When I first became a leader, my mentors would say, you make decisions with data. Of course, I agree. And I'm very analytical and I do try to be objective. But they would also say, this isn't really about intuition, instincts, for a hiring decision, let's say. And I remember questioning at the time, but I said, okay, well, they've been in leadership for a long time. They know what they're talking about. So I'm going to, listen. And I realized over time that intuition does play a role. And I think it takes experience to kind of validate your intuition and to know that you should listen to it or at least use it as a data point. But I have learned over the years to follow my intuition. So how has that, impacted my decision to make these big changes or really to make any shift or decision? Is using it as a data point and being confident in my intuition, even though sometimes I might question it. I may think this example of taking this giant leap, is it a little out there? Is it something that many people would do? Is it courageous? I can see it being courageous, and at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, because I have a value of risk taking, I look at it as taking a calculated risk and following my intuition and also thinking about tomorrow isn't promised, and that idea that I want to enjoy and be fulfilled and be challenged and all of those things today.
I love that. I'm completely leaving my script to the side because I had all these questions prepared for you. But what you're telling me right now is just so tantalizing. I want to ask so many questions about what you just said. To start with the first one, this concept of intuition being very much related to the analytical thinking, it's not separate from it, they're mutually beneficial. Can you take me through what it took for you to, first of all, hear your intuition and then be able to trust it as a professional? Because you're right. When we talk about intuition in the professional spheres, sometimes it's not taken seriously, but there is deep information in that energy. And once we feel the alignment between the intuition and our inner self, then it can be a very powerful tool. Can you take us through how you came to hear the voice of your intuition? Because you had to go through the valley to get there. I'm absolutely certain of it. What did it take for you to be able to hear the voice and then trust the voice?
Well, I can think of a couple of examples related to hiring people. And this was one of the first times that my intuition said, this person is probably not the right fit. But I was new. I was a brand new manager. Again, I was taking, advice from my mentors and things. And so I was trying to be as objective as possible. And on paper and in conversations and all of these things, this person seemed like a great fit. Like they would bring a great skill set to the role. And at the same time, yeah, there was something in the back of my mind that said, there's something I haven't figured out what it is. I had a few suspicions, but because I was new, I followed the guidance of my mentors and ended up hiring this person. And luckily, another lesson I learned is to make decisions swiftly once you have enough data that it's time to change. And so what happened was this person came on board. They were a new hire. I was taking them through the process, and I communicate expectations and standards as it relates to that. And I want them to have a great experience and to leave new hire training being excited and fully prepared to succeed and to achieve their goals. And throughout the new hire training experience, I have check-ins and things. I was getting some data points that, again, this wasn't the right fit. Luckily, as I was talking with my mentors and my supervisor at the time, they agreed that, yes, you know what, these data points you're finding, I align with you, and there was something that wasn't working for this individual. And then we made the shift of, okay, so now you've hired this person, but you know what? You've realized quickly that it's not the right fit for them. And of course, I had to have a conversation with them, and they agreed it wasn't for a variety of reasons. And we ultimately severed the relationship, and I filled the position with someone else down the road. But to answer your question, how did I begin to trust that intuition? It was that example where I realized I had made a mistake. I course corrected. I did it respectfully for that person, for the organization, because we want the right people in the role. And yeah, that gave me the confidence to say, okay, this is one example where I should have trusted my instinct. And I've had other examples like that along the way as well.
Experience does help. And it is an important part of developing our intuition. You're absolutely right. When you were in your, let's say, mid-20s or early 30s, do you think you would have as easily gone with the voice of intuition, trusted the voice of intuition, and tried to collect the data points? Or would you have been more inclined to disregard it?
Yeah. Early in my career, yes, that was I was around that age as a new manager, and I would be more likely to disregard it because of the coaching I had been given, and also because, yeah, being new in the role, you look at things very objectively and you say, I want to have the data to back it up. And at the same time, if I make this mistake and I trust my intuition, I'm wrong, then I look like I'm just a young leader who made a mistake, and that's okay. That's how we learn. But I do think I probably would have disregarded it, and I did in the beginning.
I love that honesty. I'm curious, nowadays, how do you respond to your intuition? Do you process it the same way you did in your managerial years, or is the movement different now when intuition starts speaking to you about your choices and decisions?
I think now I know I have more confidence in my intuition, and I process it probably by listening to my nervous system, as part of my decision making. So I think, yeah, absolutely, I process it differently than I did 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Yeah.
It's an important point to make, right? I love what you just said. You said, I listen to my nervous system. And I talk so much about nervous system regulation when we're talking about making choices and decisions, and how decisions that are more intuition based and more, let's say, aligned internally, they give us a sensation of expansion. Whereas the decisions that are not aligned with us, and sometimes we think, okay, decisions that are aligned with us need to be perfect, but that's not true. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about perfection. We're just talking about alignment. When a decision is not aligned, so we're going against what is good for us, right for us, for our development, for our growth moments, then it's very constrictive. You immediately notice the nervous system contracting and giving you all sorts of signals to, this is actually not the right direction for me to go.
Yeah. I love that of expansion and contraction and listening to those signals. It made me think of an example where I did have some contracting signals. In that case, I actually went against the contraction, which was an interesting story to think about because my nervous system was reacting that way because there was uncertainty. And so the situation was I was offered a promotion for a role that was ill-defined because it was new. We were going through a transformation at the company. And, this was like basically, I need you for this role. I think you're the best fit for this role. And no one has done this role before. So, we're going to be learning as we go and all of that. And, had I listened to my very rational brain, I may not have taken the role because there were so many things that were uncertain. And I was feeling those, nervous system contractions. However, I also had the nervous system expansion because, on the other side of the coin, I knew that this role would give me experiences that I did not have yet, exposure to certain levels of leadership that I didn't have, and I would learn from that. And despite the fact that the role might be challenging and complicated and all of that because of what I described, as I mentioned earlier, I like taking calculated risks, and I was aligning to my values of this is a risk I'm willing to take.
Mm. Wow, that's such a good example. We're going really deep now, and I think it's actually going to be enjoyable for listeners to sharpen their lens on decision making and also what the nervous system response really defines. Because at any given moment, when we are facing an experience, there are three levels of. So we're facing a situation. We're having three levels of experience. We have a mental experience of it, we have a physical experience of it, and we have an energetic experience of it. And when we're talking about intuition, we're not talking about the mental experience of a situation. We're also, although we think it's body, intuition is in the body, contraction, expansion comes from the body, unless we have gone through integration, even the body signals are not correct. Why? Because you're geared towards your fears. You have all sorts of insecurities and survival strategies that are not processed. So when your body reacts, that doesn't necessarily mean you are getting the right answer, which is why we have the third layer of information, the experience energetically. And what you just described was the difference, the duality and the separation between the body responding and the energy responding. The body was saying, this is really scary, it's undefined, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. But the energy was saying to you, this is going to bring me somewhere exciting. This could be good for my growth. And unless we've gone through integration, we're not going to be able to distinguish between these two voices, because the body in that moment, without the integration, is responding to instinct. Instinct says, this is unclear, uncertain, let's steer clear of it.
Yes.
But sometimes those paths are the very paths that bring us to our next level of elevation. So I love how you just took this example and described how you were feeling in the moment, because it really defines those three different phases of experience that we can only get to and truly understand, internalize, when we've done the integration work, when the survival strategies are out of the way. Because I'm sure Today, if you were to have an experience, you would still have the mental response, the body response, and the energetic response, but the voice of the energy would probably be the loudest for you if you are fully tapped into your intuition. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And that's a very helpful explanation to what I went through in the process. And
Yeah.
I am driven by energy, probably more and more the older I get as well. I don't think, if I were to talk about this around the table at my corporate office, I'm sure I would get some strange looks. But yes, it's very true.
It's true because it sounds esoteric, although it's not. It's actually science. And one of the tools we develop in our establishment of intuition, really getting attuned to understanding, hearing the voice of the intuition, is that we use our intellectual capacity to come up with reasoning. If you were to have an intuitive impulse now at the leadership table, how would you go about convincing the rest to see your point?
Yeah, that's a great question because sitting around the table, most of my colleagues would want to hear the data behind, the rationale behind the what, right? So I probably would try to access some of that would kind of justify my intuition.
Exactly. You would start by asking some very defining questions, creating collaborative suggestions, and then doing some deductive reasoning. And then voila, you've got everyone aligned with your intuition. The point I'm trying to make is that it is really important to understand, even if we are driven by our intuition solely, we can still use our analytical thinking once the integration is done. Because without integration, you've got all sorts of fears running the scene. Without internal architecture, when you haven't really developed these tools, because intuition is something we develop in the architecture phase, the middle phase of leadership development, then it's going to be really hard for you to back up your intuition. You just don't have the analytical thinking capacity to come up with good questions and good reasoning and do deductive analysis. And then it brings us to the inner authority, because if we are lacking in confidence, if we have a hard time truly believing in our own intuition, although we're hearing it now, and we're afraid of how that might look externally, then we're not going to step into authority, which means all of the work that was done is now not manifesting externally. So we may have done all of this work, but it's still not showing up. And do you see that happen around you in other leaders? Do you notice when people, they show up and they argue for their positioning to the point, and then they're not able to get everyone on board?
Sure, yes. I think you said something very important, which is, when we're trying to change behavior, or let's say get someone to align with our opinion or solution or what have you, one of the best things we can do is ask questions to pull out from the audience that we're trying to convince our reasoning, but said from them.
Yes.
And it's like their idea, or at least they're behind it because they're articulating responses to your questions that are aligning to your intuitive idea, your intuitive solutions. So yeah, I think it's the people who maybe talk at you and are not listening, who are harder. Those kinds of folks, if they have an intuition, are probably not going to convince the audience because they're trying to force it.
They're trying to force it, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, such a good point. I love this idea around question mindset. There are actually books written on it. It's fascinating. But it really is absolutely instrumental in how we practice our influence, whether it is professionally or personally. If you're asking questions, people are more inclined to be present in that conversation. But when you're doing a lot of telling, a lot of coaching, a lot of dictating, then people are not going to feel empowered to be included in a conversation, and they feel like you're trying to force them in a direction. So it's always a really good path to take, especially when we are convinced of our intuition. We know we've done all the data points, we've done all the calculations in our mind. We know what we're trying to convince people of is not just good for us, but good for the greater whole, greater organization, a greater group.
The power of silence sometimes when we ask those questions, because we're
Absolutely.
more inclined, to ask it and we don't hear a response, and so we keep talking. But we need to let it set and marinate.
Such a great point, Heather. You're absolutely right. We get so uncomfortable with the silences, but in that silence, something is growing.
Yes.
I love that. Let's pivot back again to the moment in 2018 when you answered that amazing question. I don't know who it was who asked you that question, but you're probably grateful to them for having posed that question. When you were asked, what would you do if nothing was holding you back?
Yes.
And you answered, move abroad. What do you think that moment revealed about you?
So this is a woman I had hired who I'm friends with, and she is an amazing talent, to do a retreat for my team. And this was after I had kind of had an awakening in my role at the time, that, getting back to that whole workaholic, and there was a lot going on and we needed to really reset. And so I brought her in to do a year-end meeting where I wanted to focus on our professional goals and where we were headed and what we were doing that was working and was not. But I also wanted to focus on my team and my personal goals, because I think we want to bring our whole selves to work. It revealed a couple of things. One, that I wasn't as present as I needed to be, because if I was truly present, I may have asked myself that question, or I may have taken some time to think about what would make my life more full or more fulfilled in a way. And so it revealed that I needed to do more of that. I needed to stop and not just think about work and what I needed to do to be more successful there, but also on a personal level. And the next question she asked was, okay, well, this is what you would do if you could. Why aren't you doing it? What's getting in the way? So that next layer of now thinking about the barriers that were in the way. And then that caused me to process the next level. Well, if I have to move abroad, or if I want to move abroad, here are the things that have to change in my life to make that possible. And am I willing to make those changes? How badly do I want this? So it revealed the extra layers and levels of deeper questions that needed to be asked. And actually that year, so we did this retreat in December. So my word of the year, for the next year, was presence. And we did an activity with my team as well. And we were on the beach at the time for the retreat. And so we all gathered stones and painted on the stone what was our word, for that next year. I focused on then being more present.
How beautiful. That's exactly what I meant. Every choice we make has an impact, not just externally, but also internally. And what you just described is, in so many ways, an existential moment in your life where you decided the way I've been is not conducive to who I want to become.
Yes.
And you made that pivotal shift. That's so powerful. Do you think in decision making, clarity is a mental process or more of an emotional process?
Well, clarity is absolutely critical. In fact, I would do many exercises with various teams around this book called The Advantage, and that's really at the core of this book, is clarity over certainty. To something you said earlier. We don't have to have a perfect answer as long as we're clear in what that is, and we can all be aligned to, the mission and the behaviors that will get us there. So is clarity emotional? I think, at least in my experience as it relates to decision making, clarity is less emotional and more about, what are we seeking and what needs to happen, what behaviors need to occur to achieve that. And certainly our mental state, our mindset is important and is critical there. and we need to have a healthy organization to get there. But I think I would say the first step in clarity is more rational and logical than emotional.
Such a good answer, and it is absolutely accurate. Yet, so many of us rely on our emotions to make our decisions because it's really simple. Once you're facing a decision, all you have to ask is, where am I? Where do I want to go? What's in the way? And what do I need to get there?
Yes.
Nowhere in those four statements do we see emotions. Yes, emotions are important, not in seeking clarity for a decision. It's
Yes.
more of a calibration, really recognizing, so where's my destination? Am I heading there, or do I need to recalibrate? Do I need to move a couple of inches to the right, a couple of inches to the left, so I'm actually on that trajectory? Why do you think it is so many people get sidetracked by emotions? Because they do.
Well, when it comes to decision making, our amygdala plays a big role. Our first response is survival. And so that's emotional. And until we get more experience and we learn through that experience, we probably have been driven for much of our lives by that point or at that point by our survival instincts, and how we respond to that situation rather than our rational brain. So I think that's probably what causes that response. In most of us, we're humans, right?
Yes.
This is the core of it all. And I remember, when we started the podcast, I told you I could think of some defining moments. And one of the personal ones is in my early 20s, I wore my emotions on my sleeve. All right. And so this is maybe a good example to say, yes, I am human. And at that time, I was just responding how I normally did. And I realized I had to make a shift in, um, I needed to be the driver of my emotions, be intentional about my emotions, not reactive
Exactly.
in situations.
You just described integration in such a profound way because it's the amygdala driving the decisions while we're in integration and not done with integration. I mean, there's no such thing as being done with integration altogether because at every elevation, there is re-accessing that integration process again to see it from a higher perspective. But unless we do that work, we're always going to be driven by the survival strategies, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and fall apart, which are generated by those emotional wounds behind them. And it's not to say there is something wrong with us when we have this activity, but we do have to recognize it and also recognize that at a certain point, we must make the pivot to that maturity that really says, let me be more balanced, less reactive, and more responsive. How has this shift in your ability to be more rational and seeking clarity in the right channels impacted your leadership?
We, as leaders, need to be the role models of this type of decision making. And so I'm grateful that I had this awareness before I really was leading people, because I understood the importance of the culture you create. And whenever I created a new team or joined a new team or whatever the case might be, the first step for me was always creating that healthy organizational culture and modeling, these things that contribute to good decision making based on clarity and not allowing our emotions to drive the decisions. Of course, as we said, we're human, they will enter the picture,
Of
and
course.
we can be intentional with our emotions and what do we want, how do we want that experience to feel and feel for others. So yes, it's critical, and I think it played a big role in the environment that I tried to set for people that I led. And psychological safety We're talking about amygdala hijack and how we respond in these situations. Psychological safety is critical to being a leader, creating that environment. And you're probably familiar with the Google study, Aristotle, that it was a 2-year study where they were looking at what's the number one driver, or they were trying to get to the number one driver of high-performing teams. And they had all these hypotheses that it was different things, but in the end, the number one driver was psychological safety. I came across this study later in my leadership, but I absolutely align to that, and it's part of what we're discussing.
It's undeniable, absolutely. And it's misunderstood. It's misunderstood by a lot of leaders. So many leaders think psychological safety is about enablement, having that constant managing down, sheltering, keeping everyone safe and accommodated. What, according to you, defines true psychological safety? Because it cannot be that. That just creates codependence in our environments and enabling chaos,
Yes.
not really reinforcing growth for our employees.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is an environment that allows people to learn from their mistakes, not be afraid to try new things, to speak up, to share a provocative idea. It's that idea that we're going to be a stronger unit if we are all working together, bringing in all of our diverse talents. And if you feel like you can't say something because you're afraid you're going to be judged, or you can't try something because you might not be successful. If you have those fears, you're not going to grow. You're not going to push and challenge, and that's what we're on a team to do to achieve whatever those goals are. Top performance, as an example, we have to constantly challenge each other. So it's creating that environment, and you do that as a leader by modeling it, by showing vulnerability, by talking about the mistakes that you have made. You also do that by recognizing when you see it in action, when you see someone risking being judged, let's say, by speaking up, and you reward that. These are some things we can do as leaders to create that and cultivate it on our teams.
We're lucky to work for you. They're lucky to work in your team. It's absolutely true. Being able to create an environment where people can actually go through their trials and errors. Because the best thing we can wish for our employees, for our team members, is that they go through their integration. Because the first time they go through integration is as a child, and then go through integration when they're at school. And now they're in our environment, our employees. We want them to have the safe space to integrate. I occasionally mention, imagine yourself a parent. Do you want to constantly be enabling your children? And leaders say, no, you shouldn't say that. Leaders are not parents. But who are we kidding? Mm-hmm. Who are we kidding? We actually are in that role again, maybe not as the parent, but as a custodian, because all these employees are associated with us as a leader because they're looking to us to support their growth as well, their integration as well. It's not just about the numbers, about the bottom line, but really about contributing to future generations. These young people are growing under our hands. I love what you just said. I'm so passionate about that. I think leaders sometimes miss that differentiation.
Yes,
how important it is to create that environment
where they're not reliant on you. You are giving them the skills and the tools, and I would always say, I don't want you to feel like you have to get approval from me and come back to me, right? I want to create this environment where we have boundaries. Certainly, if there are things that require my approval, if you will, of course, those enter the picture. But generally speaking, you want a team that's smarter than you, that's challenging you, that you are growing because of them. You want to give them that safety to bring that to the table.
Very true. I want to circle back to your beautiful statement that you live by. Tomorrow is not promised. If you were to look at that statement and then look back at the moment in 2018 when you decided the best thing for you, if you wanted to truly step into the ideal that you wanted to live was to move abroad. How do you think your relationship with time maybe delayed your movement? And how has your relationship with time changed since you live by this statement?
Time was a factor because I had to go through this process of, can I do this? Making the decision. Now, having done that for many years, now I probably process faster. I know that I've taken the risks, I've made the decisions. Yes, it's been a journey and a roller coaster. And at the same time, my intuition says this was what I needed to do. This is helping me grow. This is challenging me in new ways. This is not easy. And there are days still where I think about how it could be easier had I not done this. However, easier is not the answer. I want to live my values. And the fact that tomorrow isn't promised, I keep that in the back of my mind because, yeah, I want to live for today, be present, make decisions that will bring me all of the joy and growth and everything now. I have a dear friend who I met when I moved to Spain 2 years ago. I met her right before I moved to Spain, and we became like soul sisters. And a couple of months ago, she had some symptoms, and long story short, she had a brain tumor, and she's no longer with us. And, this is an extreme example, but an example of anything can happen. And, I want to make the most of today now. I hope there's a big future ahead. But these are reminders that we should live for today and really be present and grateful. And I am, in this case, so grateful for the short time I had with her. She taught me so many things about gratitude, about consciousness. And she left us very peacefully and content with the life she had lived. So I want to follow in her footsteps of no regrets. Of course, that we have regrets, but trying to listen to our intuition, listen to what matters to us, and make those tough decisions, even if it's going to be a journey, a roller coaster, emotional at times. All of those things. It's worth it in the end. And even if it's not exactly how we envisioned it, it's not perfect because it won't be, right?
No, it will never be perfect,
No.
but it will always be a movement forward.
Yes.
I'm so sorry for your loss. Very tragic.
Yes, indeed.
You were blessed to have her in your life for as long as you did. Looks like she's taught you a lot of really good lessons.
She has.
That's really beautiful. What is the most unexpected lesson you learned from this move you made? Literally and figuratively leaving everything behind in your old life, the old self.
And this one is more of an emotional lesson, I think, because I knew I was making a lot of changes. And, the data would suggest the more changes you make at once, the more likely you are to have an unregulated, dysregulated nervous system. And, it's tough. I think I went through many of the things that cause high levels of stress as it relates to change. But the one thing I didn't really anticipate as much is when I came here, as I mentioned earlier, I was now single. I had left my corporate job. I didn't speak the language. I'm learning it, but that takes time. And I really didn't have an identity anymore. I mean, I had an identity of who I am at the core, my values, but I had to I am redefining myself and also introducing myself to people I don't know. And when you don't, have an introduction about what do you do for a living, or, you're there with your partner, or whatever the case might be. All of these things are fine. And I made those choices, and they have brought me a lot of wonderful things as a result. But I didn't realize how hard it would be to not have that identity, and that I would really have to search my soul, to redefine my purpose, because it was different in some ways. Of course, I'm still the same person at the core, but being in a new environment, and have not even being able to really have a conversation with everyone because they don't speak English and I don't speak Spanish. How do you communicate your identity? And then at the same time, at the end of the day, that was more for me personally.
Yes.
I don't think anyone I met really was, wow, she doesn't know who she is, and this was more of an exploration for me.
Yes.
But I didn't really anticipate how challenging that might be, or how confronting that could be for me personally.
Gosh, yes, that is such a extraordinarily challenging experience to go through. It resonates with me. I remember when my life completely changed, when I made the choice to make the change, I literally felt like I was walking around without my limbs attached.
Yes.
Just had no idea of where am I in relation to my environment. First of all, this environment is not home. Where is home? There is no home, and then there is no body, there is no self, and it's a complete reconstruction and redefinition of identity, and maybe values that need to be chucked, that need to be gotten rid of because they no longer resonate with this new personality, and then starting to build from scratch. It cannot be underestimated. That journey is so extraordinarily difficult. It's the ultimate definition of going through the valley, because you're going through all three phases at the same time. And that's why it can be so dysregulating. It's not for the faint of hearts. That's absolutely true. Yet you're sitting here across from me with a big smile on your face. Our listeners are not going to be able to see you on video, but I can tell them that you're vibrant, you're healthy, you're glowing, and I can definitely say it's a massive shift from the first conversation we had, which was just after your move to Spain, and the moment today. I'm so proud to call you my friend, and I've learned so much from your journey as you've tackled the ups and downs of it. I have a question for you. If someone was listening and they had already figured out what their quote unquote Spain is, what would you advise them about the monumental journey that would be waiting for them should they decide to pivot in the direction of their Spain?
That is a very good question. Because as you were asking the question, tactical things came into my mind. I'm trying to think about the question on a deeper level, because certainly I would advise them to truly have clarity that this is something that will align with their values, and that is worth going through the valley at the end of the day. And I would say the answer is, if it's something that you want badly enough, it certainly is worth it, because you will learn from it. You will grow. You will likely you will certainly be a different version of yourself, maybe a better version of yourself, and your life will be enriched in a new way, on a different level. So if your goal is enrichment, growth, following your heart with clarity and aligned to your values, then I would say be prepared for the valley or valleys. Have a network like you, Bahar. We met when I was starting to go through this, and we didn't know each other, but we connected immediately, and have leaned on each other throughout this journey. So you were a new person as part of my network, And I also have people from my past that I've known for 20 plus years who are part of my network. So have a support system. Have a Spanish support system, an American support system across Europe, wherever your support system is. Have that in place, because you will need that. You will need the ears of people, the shoulders of people. But at the end of the day, if you're following your heart and you have courage to take that step, to take that calculated risk, it's worth it.
I love that advice. Absolutely. It is worth it. And it's not just one valley, it's many valleys over and over again. You're absolutely right. But it's absolutely worth the glorious sunshine at the tip of the mountain when you get there. Heather, if you were to fast forward 10 years and you were to meet the 10-year wiser version of yourself, more experienced version of yourself, what do you think she would say to you?
I can think of a few things. One would be the reminder that I often have in the back of my mind, which is control the controllables. And really what we can control is ourselves. We can't control others. We can't control the situation, what could happen. Expect the unexpected. Anything can change. Things will change. And roll with it. Listen to your nervous system. Listen to your intuition. And also be light. Be as light as you can, because you will get through it, whatever it is. And yeah, do things, make those decisions with thought, with reflection, with caution, but do them swiftly, because tomorrow isn't promised. So why not listen to those voices and take action today?
Wow. I love this older version. Actually resembles you in many ways. But what a great friend to have, to engage with on a regular basis. Very wise. I love that. Yes, this is the valley. We don't go around it, we go through it. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's been such a joy having you here today. I am absolutely certain people are going to draw a lot of inspiration from the stories you've told, the information you've shared, and your wise insights. So thank you for being here.
It was my pleasure. It was really fun. Also a good exercise to reflect on these things. So thank
True.
you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
And for now, I'd like to leave you with this. Shift your psychology to shift your energy and shift your leadership. Until next time.